It's a very good question, but what we have seen in the last 18 months, especially with the local Met, Croydon's local Met, they've now reached out to the community at large. They've had young people that are not necessarily from the affluent communities, young people from local communities around here like Thornton Heath, South Norwood, who are now training the Met on local policing, how to work collaboratively to engage young people. Historically, we've had many breakdowns due to stop and search, but we now have young people from Croydon working with the Met, training the Met, being paid to train the Met in how to police locally without increasing further tensions. Thank you, Reverend. I don't even understand.
First and the name of the church that you come from.
Okay, my name's Pastor Beryl St James. I'm a community pastor, street pastor. I work in Thornton Heath, West Croydon, Central Croydon, and pretty much anywhere that there's footwork to be done.
And in your work, do you often speak to parents who are worried about their children?
Absolutely. It's a main part of the community programme in speaking with the parents. In, for example, getting parents to find out who their children's friends are. Who are they meeting? Are they attending school? What is if your child comes in wearing a pair of Balenciagas, where did your child get them? Get more involved, speak with your child, find out what's going on in their lives. I know we all have to work, we all have duties to fulfill, but you cannot, as a parent, think that it's okay to leave the state to continually look after your child. We've got to get more involved.
And do you think the onus really is then on parents rather than schools and other services?
I think it's something that has to happen together. It's something that needs to work together. We are looking at the amount of children that have been excluded from schools. When you exclude a child, where are you putting them? Are you now moving them out of the classroom into a park? There is not enough follow-up work that sits around exclusion work. There are children that there are flags and signposts that you can see that there is trouble going on here. And I appreciate that finances and everybody's got things to do, but there are some red flags that come up. And part of the work that we do, for example, if it's school time and you drive past a park and there are 15 children that you can roughly work out their age between 13 and 15, there's no teacher there, what are they doing in the park? You have to ask the questions. Part of the work that we do within the church, and I was just explaining on Boxing Day, got a call from a mother, please come to my house. Got to the house, she's pulled out one of the biggest knives ever. As the church, we're here to help to collect some of these weapons. We're here to support you. It's not just about hallelujah. We're on the floor. We're here to help signpost you, give you instructions, help in getting your children and keeping them safe.
I guess if a parent sees something suspicious or finds a knife in their child's backpack, I suppose they might not first think of going to the police because that could bring their child into trouble. I mean, what would you say, what advice would you give in that sense?
So you find the knife or you see something that isn't quite right. If you don't want to speak with the police, and traditionally we've had some issues around that, but I will tell you things are getting better. But there are organisations and people like myself give us a call. Across Croydon, we have many different organisations. There are intervening grassroots systems that are available. Get in touch with somebody. It might be that you making that call saves the life of your child and somebody else's.
And finally, when something tragic like this happens in a community, what is the sort of questions or reflections that people have?
I think people often fail to recognise the ripple effect of this, because it may look as if it is one child, but the effects that happen with that one child, it's not just that family. That family will grieve, there's devastation, there's heartache, there's pain. But for all the other families that are connected, so that child may be your nephew, might be your cousin, might be your friend. It goes on and on and on. And then with people like myself, who are doing the counselling. We're counselling the family, working with the family, we're working with the police. But there are other families who will sit and grieve also, and we don't always see that. So it isn't just the death of one, it affects so many people.
Morning everyone, my name is Alex Murray. I'm a commander in the Met Police responsible for getting violence down in London. Thanks very much for coming today. First and foremost, I can't imagine the pain that the families of loved ones, two who have died last night, are feeling right now. It must be incredibly raw, and I know the thoughts of all the people I work with in the Met are with the mums, dads and families and brothers and sisters of the young people who died last night. I do want to reassure you and say that violence and tackling violence and youth violence is our number one priority in London. Right from dealing with county lines through to taking money and drugs and guns off the streets, through to being in the right place at the right time, policing hotspots of violence, and then getting upstream. We've got hundreds of police officers who work in schools, all trying really hard to tackle violence at its causes. Now, as a result of that effort, and with partners and with community groups and with the local authority, we have seen over the last few years significant reductions in violence, in knife crime and gun crime, but not for teenagers. For teenagers, we have had an increase in homicides. And I guess my message today, other than to speaking to the families and friends of those that London has lost tonight, is to say you cannot carry knives in London. This is what happens when knives are carried. And we all have a role in relation to tackling knife crime. Anybody can ring Crime Stoppers, an independent charity, and call and say this person's got a knife or someone's carrying a knife, and action will be taken. We take about 400 knives a month off the streets from young people who are carrying knives. But in actual fact, everybody has a role to play here and is playing. And I just encourage anybody who knows if someone is carrying a knife, tell them not to. We know people get hurt if you carry knives. It's not something you should carry if you're fearful. If you're fearful, don't carry a knife. That's the main comment. I'd encourage everybody to get involved. You've seen how we work with community groups to tackle violence. This is a local problem, a family problem, a community problem, a police problem, a local authority problem. We've all got a role to play to make sure that we reduce these tragedies that are taking place.
Does the Met Police have any intelligence that the stabbing occurred an hour later that they can do that?
We have no intelligence, and it's so early at the moment, not really free to talk about the detail of the two investigations.
Teenage homicides in London. I appreciate what you just said about everyone having to work together, but clearly Met needs to do something different, because you're repeating that same message, but murders just keep on rising.
Yeah, so the tragedy is teenage murders are up. Total murder rate and knife crime is down, and we are doing a lot of different things. We're investing in prevention, putting officers in schools, as I mentioned. We do a thing called problem solving, where we work in a particular area where violence might spike, and we go, what are the causes here? And we work with partners to deal with those causes of crime. And things like county lines, which does affect teenagers so much more. We've charged thousands of people with county lines, both here in London and people exporting drugs to some of the towns around the UK. So a huge amount of effort is going on with thousands and thousands of police officers, both in the prevention space and also in detecting crime and getting justice for victims. The detection rate for homicide in London is nearly 95%. You know, it's very high, and there's a lot of... I've just been speaking to detectives involved in the case. A huge amount of effort has gone in getting justice for victims and actually solving the homicides when they happen.
But the youngest who are the victims of this are still disproportionately represented. Surely there needs to be a different strategy at this point.
Well, you're right about the disproportionality, and it's the disproportionality we don't hear about so much. So, you know, young lads in London, and it's young black lads in London, largely, who are affected more than anyone else. And we need to really start understanding that and dealing with it. And from a policing point of view, it's represented in our data. You know, when we look at people who are both victims and who are charged with homicide, we see disproportionality, and it's something we've got to work really hard on dealing with. And again, that's not just the police, that's all of us working together in the public sector, but also in the private sector, and also families, NGOs, community groups, churches.
So there's clearly a lot of distrust still, for the police in some of the communities. So how do you tackle that?
We tackle that by building relationships. Now, you've spoken to Anthony earlier. Through the good times and through the bad times, the police will never leave, and the community groups will never leave. We've got to work together. The bigger picture is stopping young people getting hurt that you've just described. That's what the police care about. That's what the community groups care about. And when we realise that both our motivations are really good in tackling that, that's when we start to build trust. And you've seen here in Croydon, over the last 18 months, bridges being built between community groups and the police, because we realise that our motivation is to make a change and to tackle what you've described around teenage homicides.
And do you think that you've got enough people from local communities really represented in the Met, so they're able to build those bridges, and so that people that they approach can have the confidence that their pleas will be taken seriously?
So along with getting violence down, being representative and building trust with the communities is our 1 and 2 objectives in London. A huge amount of effort is making us representative on recruiting more people from the communities that we serve, and we're making great strides in that area, and it's really, really encouraging. Thank you.
Tonight is New Year's Eve. In terms of the police presence here,
So I've just been speaking to the local superintendent. We have a lot of extra officers on because it's New Year's Eve. We will be policing from now over the weekend in the parks, in the spaces where violence tends to peak. We'll be dealing with some of the parties where, again, violence tends to peak, and there is a significant uplift in resources, both in the geography and areas that we're concerned about, but also tackling some of the gangs, tackling some of the importation of drugs, some of the money launderers. The whole scale of it is aimed at bringing down violence, and that's happening right now.
the Met is currently trialling knife crime prevention in a record-breaking year. Does that mean that this is really working?
Knife crime prevention orders, these are orders that on conviction they can be given to an individual, or if there's a lot of intelligence that they carry knives, and they're right at their early days at the moment, so we've got many of applications through the court, and it's impossible to say whether they are effective or not, but we're testing that, and that's just another one of the many things that we're doing. Knife crime prevention orders, we're dealing with people who market knives, people who sell knives, we are taking huge amounts off the street, so virtually from every angle you can imagine, we're tackling the violent crime associated with both guns and knives.
And how can you reassure parents that their children will be safe tonight?
Well, what I'd say to everyone is there's a huge police presence out tonight. But if you have concerns, talk to your kids. Make sure they're not carrying knives. Make sure they're not hanging around with kids carrying knives. And if you do have a concern that they've got a knife under their bed, or their friend's got a knife under their bed, that's what Crime Stoppers is for. It's independent. You're anonymous. You can make the call and we can make the change. And that's the point. We don't know who has knives, but we can find out, and we can stop them hurting someone or being hurt. And, don't listen to it from me. There's an incredible campaign that I'd encourage all of your viewers to watch. It's called Hardcall Saves Lives. And it's from 5 or 6 mums here in London who've lost their sons to knives. And it's them saying, please, look, call Crime Stoppers if someone's carrying a knife. It's a hard call, but it can save a life from a child that might get killed, but also from the child that might end up being incarcerated for years and years and years. So I think there's a number of factors. Now, it's worth saying that even for knife injury under 25s, it's significantly down. It's 30 or 40% down. But for teenagers in particular, there's probably 3 things operating. One is the glorification of knives on social media and credibility, and people cussing each other on social media. We're seeing it again and again and again, and we're taking videos off YouTube all the time. But it is incredibly provocative. At the same time, we've got changing drug markets and the emergence of county lines in the last few years that we're really focusing on. And the other one is just the amount of people carrying knives, the amount of young people carrying knives. it's got to be unacceptable, and it's got to be unacceptable for them. And it's no good me saying that, but it is really important that everyone else also says it. And that's why we're out there, and that's why we are taking knives off the street. But it's probably those three things intersecting to cause the peak in teenage homicides. Was that a number of things can happen if they speak to Crime Stoppers, if they don't want to speak to the police, then the intervention can go through Crime Stoppers. But I would ask them to reach out to people in the community who they know and trust, or to speak to the police, because I can say the police can be trusted, and say, look, I'm concerned here, what can you do? We could make referrals. You know, there are youth groups out there, there are NGOs, there's people like Anthony King who represent a number of different groups who could intervene with that individual. I mean, the main message to a parent who's concerned about a child is if their child is carrying a knife, that's when they're going to get hurt. And so, do whatever you can to intervene to stop those knives being carried.
What is the Met going to do next year to make sure next year isn't another record-breaking?
The ambition of the Commissioner and the Metropolitan Police is unwavering around violence. It will remain the number one focus with building trust with communities. So next year we will be focusing our efforts in area where knife crime is the highest. We'll be problem solving, we'll be pushing into schools, we'll still be taking knives off the streets, but we'll be dealing with those drivers of violence as well, drugs, guns and money. And we have Operation Orochi, which is tackling county lines. We're upscaling that considerably, so that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. If you're engaged in county lines, the chances are you're going to get caught. And there is an absolute laser-like focus on county lines and violence here in London next year.
Final two questions, please.
Why is it getting worse?
So the violence in London, if you heard the Mayor's speech just before Christmas as well, is not up, it's down considerably. So robberies are down about 40%. Knife stabbing for under 25s is down about 40%. Total murders is down. As I mentioned, the bad bit is the tragedy of these young men being killed here on the streets of London, and teenagers. And why that bit is getting worse is that I mentioned the changing drug market, some of the social media videos, often drill videos that are encouraging it, localised videos where people are given to come on to another group, and kids carrying knives, and that becoming more acceptable in those circles, and that's what we have to stop.
Final question, please.
Anything you want to say to the family of this 15-year-old boy?
Well, to the family of this 15-year-old lad, and to the family of the young man who was killed in Hillingdon, you know, the poignancy of the time of year, got teenagers myself, all I can say is that the Met is reaching out to you. We'll do everything we can to bring those offenders to justice. We can't imagine the pain that you are going through, but you must know that we are absolutely committed to bringing those offenders to justice, but also to tackling violence across the whole of London, so that more mums and dads and brothers and sisters don't have to be in a position that they're in right now. And I can't imagine the unbearable pain that they must be in right now.
Thank you very much, everyone.